Policy Lessons from South Korea's Development. Concluding Remarks with Shahid, Yusuf.
Hello everyone, my name is Shahid Yusuf. I'm Chief Economist of the Growth Dialogue at George Washington University. My primary area of interest is East Asia, and I've been studying Korea's development since the mid-1970s. Over the past 4 weeks, you have heard from a dozen distinguished commentators how Korea moved at amazing speed up the income ladder to become a highly industrialized economy, one of the world's leading exporters, an innovation powerhouse, and since 1996, a member of the OECD. You have also read a lot about the policies that enabled Korea to join the ranks of the high-income nations. My talk today will provide a brief overview of what we have covered by addressing 3 questions. First, from a number of success stories, why is Korea's experience deemed to be especially instructive for developing countries today? Second, which of the several facets of Korea's development are of the greatest relevance for low and middle-income economies? And third, in what ways should the Korean model be modified to take account of changing global environment, technologies, and the new challenges such as climate change? Why does Korea deserve prime billing? The main reason is that it is a mid-sized, resource-poor country, much more like the median developing economy than either Singapore or China, 2 other East Asian superstars. A second and equally important reason is that Korea demonstrated that it's possible to compress several stages of industrialization into 3 short decades. Starting with the most basic and labor-intensive manufacturing activities in the 1960s, Korea has managed the impossible. It diversified into complex, capital-intensive activities such as petrochemicals, machinery, shipbuilding, and automobiles. It became a competitive exporter of all these products within a handful of years, and it did not stop there. By the late 1980s, Korean firms were a force in consumer electronics. A decade later, the leading chaebol were becoming important producers of sophisticated electronic components and mobile handsets. Even more remarkable is that this highly diversified, world-class industrial base was built up by Korean companies themselves. It was financed largely from domestic savings and rendered competitive by blending imported technological know-how with domestically generated innovations. Other East Asian trigger economies also grew rapidly during the last third of the 20th century, but all relied to a greater degree on multinational corporations, and none matched Korea's industrial breadth. In short, for both late-starting, low-income countries and for middle-income economies faced with slowing growth, Korea is the beacon. Clearly, no developing country today can hope to exactly replicate Korea's industrial strategy. But building a diversified industrial base, even on a more modest scale, and complementing manufacturing with tradable services remains a desirable objective. And to do this, at least 3 lessons from Korea's past still resonate. First, a strong state focused on development via a market-based system is a necessary condition. Effective states must severely limit rent-seeking activities and to create instruments to implement policies. Korea and other successful economies have demonstrated the importance of capable public bureaucracies that can plan, coordinate, and implement. They have also highlighted the key role of export-oriented private firms, whether large conglomerates as in Korea or entrepreneurial small and medium ones as in some of the other economies. Although Korea launched its development under a highly authoritarian state, its transition to a democratic regime in the late 1980s helped sustain growth momentum. My reading of the research to date is that a focused democratic state is more resilient and more likely to deliver results over the longer term than an authoritarian one. The debate on this matter continues. A second lesson relates to workforce capabilities. Lacking natural resources, Korea relied on its labor, and it rightly gave due attention not just to the quantity of schooling, but also to the quality of learning. Public and private investment in education and in vocational training has a high payoff. When too little is invested in building human capital, productivity rises slowly because there is not enough technology assimilation and innovation. A lot of convincing research shows that it is the quality of education that really moves the growth needle. In today's world, good education and technical skills are more important than ever because technology is becoming more skill-intensive and jobs for the unskilled are scarce. Both the experience of Korea and more recently of China indicates that education quality can be improved relatively quickly if governments devote the policy effort and the resources to doing so. Similarly, when there is a base of schooling to build upon, the needed workforce skills for manufacturing or services can be acquired within a matter of years. A third lesson that has now taken on greater significance concerns the value of ICT skills and the supporting infrastructure. Korea was an early mover, and it has reaped the benefits. Digital technologies are penetrating every corner of our lives and transforming the production of manufactures and services. Digitization and the internet are also profoundly affecting the trade in services, the fastest rising component of global trade. The role of IT skills and ICT infrastructure was only dimly apparent in the mid-1990s when Korea launched a national effort. Today, it underpins economic performance. Countries that do not invest in both the hardware and the software risk being left behind. This brings me to my final question. How should the changing global environment be factored into the economic strategy derived from Korea's experience? And how should we take account of new challenges? When Korea was embarking on its great economic surge, world trade was expanding rapidly as countries lowered tariff and other barriers. Today, in the aftermath of the Great Recession, the medium-term forecast is for slow growth of the global economy and of trade in the 3% range or less. Between the mid-1960s and the mid-1990s, Korea encountered limited competition from other newly industrializing economies. Today, the field is crowded and all industrializing countries face severe competition from China across the product spectrum. It would seem that codification of technology has lowered industrial entry barriers, and many economies have taken steps to improve the business climate. But the competition from established producers that dominate global value chains is far sterner. Also, there is some reshoring of manufacturing back to the developed countries made possible by automation. Both these developments, slowing trade and increased competition, limit the scope for rapid industrialization. Countries must now experiment with a mix of manufacturing and services in order to raise productivity and achieve growth, and they must exploit foreign direct investment to the fullest. The ending of the resource supercycle has battered the economies of energy and mineral exporting countries. Diversifying into other tradables has become more urgent. But in many instances, their domestic wage rates are such that they can only compete in high-end products or services. Entering these is more difficult. Lower commodity prices should have boosted the growth prospects of other developing economies. Quite surprisingly, they have not. Climate change introduces further complications and costs. Many developing countries are beginning to feel its effects, and unfortunately, the warming trend will persist. Korea has a head start in introducing green technologies and curbing greenhouse gas emissions. Other developing countries must follow Korea's lead. But initially, introducing these new technologies could increase investment burdens and dampen productivity. There are other issues covered in Module 4 that have acquired prominence in the 21st century. The aging of populations in some countries and the inadequacy of social safety nets will increase already large fiscal burdens. Rapidly growing populations in Africa and other parts of Asia and accelerating urbanization make it urgent to create good jobs in cities. In sum, the need for economic growth is greater than ever. Growth that must be spearheaded by firms can generate the resources to support aging populations, jobs for the huge numbers of youthful entrants into the labor force, and financing to promote green development. However, the developmental process and the composition of activities are likely to diverge from Korea's in the last quarter of the 20th century. The lessons from the Korean experience covered by this online course, we hope, will stimulate constructive discussion of how countries can industrialize, develop competitive services, and participate in trade. Each country will need to devise policies that are fully informed by domestic circumstances and that factor in global trends. Korea's growth strategy, which it continues to elaborate, can provide the tested building blocks for others.